now on Indianapolis This Week.
I said last December that I wanted it to be an education session, and I think the results speak for themselves.
The session may be over, but the political fighting is in full swing. Our insiders on the winners and losers in the session and the possible new candidates for governor.
Indiana's voters do not support the governor's approach to getting his way.
A new call to change the Religious Freedom Act. The group of pastors saying Christians have been deeply betrayed by the law. And fighting an epidemic inside the work to stop the outbreak of HIV in southern Indiana.
From RTV6, the Indy Channel, this is Indianapolis This Week with Rafael Sanchez.
Thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. Our insiders are standing by to talk about the legislative session and the race for governor. But first, we need to talk about the urgent fight to stop that HIV outbreak in southern Indiana. As of today, the State Department of Health is confirming 145 cases of confirmed HIV. 2 of those are preliminary results. These latest numbers come as the state health commissioner now also has the power to expand needle exchange programs. The biggest question, has the state contained that outbreak in Scott County?
The people who we've identified as having HIV, we talk to them and find out who else they've engaged in high-risk activities with, and so far we've identified 410 contacts, and we've traced 318 of those contacts. So over 75% of our contacts have been traced. I will say that once we reach all those contacts, we'll feel confident that we have a good handle on the outbreak.
You will now have the power to expand needle exchange programs in the state when you believe it's necessary. Will that help the situation, or will that make it worse?
I don't think it'll make it worse, and particularly I don't think it will make it worse because of the caution that both the governor and the legislature applied to this process. One thing I'd like to say is that I feel that there's been a lot of information about needle exchange, and perhaps some people have overstated the case for needle exchange alone. The science does not suggest in an unqualified way that needle exchange is good anti-drug policy. What the science does suggest is that as part of a comprehensive package and with wraparound services and community buy-in, it can slow the spread of disease.
Is Scott County the only county on the radar, though? That's the county that's experiencing the most health issues with this HIV problem. What about Marion and the other counties that have big drug problems?
Scott County is certainly where the fire is, and we're concentrating on putting out the fire, but I've also said that it's the canary in the coal mine. People ask what's different about Scott County. The conditions that led to this outbreak exist throughout Indiana and throughout our country. And so we hope to use this as an opportunity to shine a light on these issues and also to put together a model response. The governor and I sat down and talked, and he was adamant that we use this as a model response so that if we do have these problems occur in other areas, that we can then roll out, and we know the plans and procedures to go through. And you saw that with needle exchange.
To another hot topic this week, a renewed debate over the Religious Freedom Act. This time, the call is to return the law to its original form and repeal the fix signed by Governor Pence earlier this month. Hundreds of pastors rallied for that change this week. The group has also written an open letter to Indiana leaders saying the fix RFRA legislation has opened the door to a trampling of our liberties, and saying directly to Governor Pence that signing the fix betrayed the trust of millions of Hoosiers who elected you to protect the liberties we hold dear. Let's bring in now to the program Dr. Ron Johnson. He's the executive director of the Indiana Pastors Alliance and the senior team leader at the Living Stones Church in Crown Point in northern Indiana. Welcome to the program. Isn't this fight over? We heard from the business community. We heard from state leaders. They made the fix. Why are you still battling this issue?
You know, I think a lot of the folks representing us down here at the Statehouse would wish this were over. I find it interesting that things that are highly controversial usually point to something that's incredibly important. And the reason this has been so controversial is what could be more important than religious liberty. And so this fix is far from over, because what happened, or the legislation is far from over, is this fix literally opened the door to an even greater trampling of our liberties, which would happen again at the next legislative session when the LGBT community is going to be pushing, as we've heard, for special civil rights status under the law here in Indiana. And that opens a whole new can of worms, so to speak, for the trampling of religious liberty here in Indiana.
But turning the clock back, aren't we then encouraging discrimination? Wasn't that the major issue here, that the law itself encouraged discrimination? Do you support discrimination?
That was ridiculous. The law had nothing to do with discrimination. The law set a standard so that private businesses could conduct their businesses under the liberties of their religious beliefs and consciences. And what we saw was all this rhetoric about, you know, if you come and you're a gay person, you come to my restaurant, I'm going to somehow refuse to serve you a hamburger. The issue is not serving hamburgers. The issue is on marriage. The specific situations where business owners have had problems is when they're being asked to participate in a same-sex wedding, the activity of which causes them to either violate their most deeply held religious beliefs or violate their consciences. And so, Raphael, I believe the question we should be asking Americans and Hoosiers is, are we really at a place today where we believe it's the government's right to coerce people to believe a certain way about marriage? And if you believe that marriage should be between a man and a woman, then all of a sudden you aren't allowed to have that belief any longer. That's what's concerning to me.
If the Supreme Court comes back and does say that same-sex marriages are legal across the country, does this issue die then? I mean, do you still have something to stand on?
That was a point of our, no, the issue, by the way, doesn't die. What you do is you open up a whole new era of civil disobedience in the United States of America.
Are there signs where there is a trampling of religious liberties in Indiana? I mean, do we have cases where churches or synagogues or temples where people are just not able to do what they need to do because of the law?
Well, and again, I don't know if I can pull out specific examples. We had the bakery example down here in Indianapolis where folks, I forget the name of the bakery, I'm not prepared for that, but they came under the hostile demands of the local city council when they decided that they just weren't going to bake cupcakes or something for an LGBT event, which they found personally violating, you know, their religious liberties. But here's the larger issue. Everything we talked about in this debate on the other side was hypotheticals, hypothetical discrimination. We are seeing a flood in courtrooms across America, especially in more liberal regions of this country, where people are being drawn into court and fined and put out of business and having their family finances ruined.
As a voting bloc, the Republican Party counts on churches to get out the vote. So in 2016, who will you be supporting in the elections? I mean, are you counting on Republicans to carry this torch for you?
Well, let's just put it this way. Our Democratic friends have not been friendly to religious liberty at all. Most of the places where the egregious trampling of liberty is taking place are in progressive, liberal, leftist, Democratic strongholds.
But sir, a supermajority in the State House. Republicans control both the House and the Senate. They're the ones that allow
Well, let me get to Indiana, because you're exactly right. We should not be facing what the rest of our nation is facing, especially in our urban areas and stronghold areas where Democrats are leading. We have a supermajority here of people that said they stood for the unborn, they stood for marriage, and they stood for religious liberty. The reason we were down at the State House is we were to remind them that we're the folks who roll up our sleeves.
So what are you going to do in 2016? Because they didn't listen to you.
Well, you're exactly right, and we were there to say, you better start listening, because this is a major wake-up call. Because if you think we're just going to roll along and we're primarily Republicans by birth or something like that, you got another thing coming. We are Christians. We believe in the Word of God. We vote according to biblical standards. And if you are going to legislate against the law of God, you will never have us stand with you.
Will you support Mike Pence?
I will support Mike Pence because Mike Pence is a good and decent man, and Mike Pence disappointed us here, but I'm not going to throw out the body of his work on one vote. Okay. I do have a bigger issue with those who are driving the legislative session, our leadership in the Senate and our leadership in the House, who I believe were responsible for the fix. But when push comes to shove, if Mike Pence gets the nomination from the Republicans, which I certainly believe that he will, and I have to look at where the Democrat stands, I can almost promise you where they're going to stand on this issue. It'll be a no-brainer.
Dr. Johnson, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Raphael.
Coming up, state lawmakers may have left town, but who should be celebrating victories in this year's General Assembly? Our political insiders are ready to answer that question next on Indianapolis This Week. Welcome back to Indianapolis This Week. We turn our attention to the State House, where the General Assembly has wrapped up an often contentious session, one that started with talk of education and balanced budget amendments and quickly became known for the fight over religious objections and squabbles over control of education policy. Our TV6 State House reporter Katie Hines has been there for all of it.
As Hoosiers begin to unpack what we've been able to accomplish in this budget, they're going to see a historic investment in education in every form at every level in the state of Indiana that will benefit our kids and our families and our state for generations.
Raphael, the governor and top Republican leaders are calling the 2015 legislative session a success. Lawmakers approved many of the governor's top agenda items, including the $84 million Regional Cities Initiative. Lawmakers included the largest increase in K-12 education funding in the state's history in this budget, and they're advancing significant changes to the makeup and authority of the State Board of Education. But both Republicans and Democrats admit the controversy over the Religious Freedom Act distracted them from the business at hand. Democrats argue that law and the repeal of the common construction wage move Indiana a step backward. Two bills with high interest didn't clear the legislature this session: the Indy 11 Stadium proposal and a bill to allow the sale of alcohol on Sunday. And Governor Pence had declared this an education session, but House Speaker Brian Bosma says the next budget in 2 years will need to focus on infrastructure. Raphael.
Katie, thank you. With that, we will now welcome our political insiders, Laura Beck and Abdul Hakim Shabazz. We heard at the top of the program the governor saying that this was the year of education, that the results speak for themselves. What are those results?
The results are more funding, a bigger increase for funding for schools in state history. We're closing the gap between funding for rich schools and poor schools. We're finally fixing the school funding formula that's needed to be fixed for a really, really long time. Yes, there will be some schools that get more money, some schools will get less money because we have shifting populations, but education came out a winner. And this is in spite of the fact that we're taking in a couple $100 million in less revenue, but schools are still getting more money.
Well, I don't know what parallel universe that Abdul is living in.
We'll talk to him about it.
I think what comes to me is that just because you say it's an education session doesn't make it an education session. I mean, the biggest takeaway from this session was the RFRA debacle. And as we just heard from Pastor Johnson previously, they are still going to be pushing for having this type of discriminatory language.
I totally understand. My good friend here wants to shift the debate to RFRA because schools came out ahead. Schools did very well.
But some schools will lose.
Some schools are going to lose. Yeah, absolutely.
$10 million.
Because some schools are losing population.
But they also deal with a lot of big issues, right?
They
Autism,
do.
special education needs. I mean, there is.
But this is why the lawmakers changed the complexity index, which is how we fund dollars for that at-risk population. And I would argue you have a much more effective measurement now as opposed to using free and reduced lunch, where you had to sometimes or textbooks, which what the Democrats wanted, which is how you got to.
I think what we're going to see is our urban schools just absolutely decimated, and I think that some school districts like IPS have been very creative in how they work with other schools and how they create public-private partnerships. But at the same time, it is an irrefutable fact that those schools are going to take a huge hit. And if you live in IPS, such as I do, I live in an urban neighborhood. It really has an impact on your neighborhood. And I think it's really incredibly. I think that what we're seeing is the donut counties, for example, and we'll see what happens with the rural schools too, but those donut counties, that shores up that Republican base.
But when you're losing population, that's part of the issue.
But I think you also have to remember that educating a child who comes from a background that is not the same as many of those who live in donut counties or more wealthier counties, it costs more to educate them.
We heard from the speaker that infrastructure will have to be the next big issue, but can we really wait 2 years to let our bridges crumble and the roads fall apart? I know that every winter and spring pothole season comes around. Can we wait that long to deal with safety issues?
Well, it's not so much that. The question is going to be, how do we pay for roads in the future? This is a question that is facing.
Is it taxes?
Well, no. But the thing is, we're driving much more fuel.
That's a dirty word.
We're driving much more fuel-efficient vehicles. So Indiana is not collecting as much in gas tax revenue as it used to. Part because of fuel-efficient vehicles, also part because of the price of oil. So it's going to take a comprehensive plan and a comprehensive approach to figure out how exactly we are going to pay for roads.
Revenues were kind of low. They were not as expected. Are they going to have to reopen this budget if the revenues does not project in the long term? Are we going to have to come back and say, let's open the budget again?
I don't think anybody wants to open the budget up in 2016. I mean, 2016 is a big political year. Many of these folks are up, including everyone in the House. I don't think anyone is going to want to open that budget up.
The budget won't be reopened, but what the governor automatically has is what's called a reversion allotment authority.
Winner.
So he can hold back on spending if the money's not there.
In this session, the biggest winner.
Democrats. Absolutely.
I would say the Speaker and Senate Pro Tem for averting the Titanic disaster that was happening with RFRA.
Which they caused to.
And the biggest loser?
Okay.
Or biggest losers?
Republican Party supermajority and Governor Pence. It was a bad session for them.
I would say the governor was not one of the governor's better sessions.
He's so diplomatic.
When we come back, a familiar name returns for a run for governor as another top name hints at challenging Mike Pence. Our insiders talk that and Tuesday's primary election next on Indianapolis This Week.
I used to introduce myself as the guy with two first names, but after what Indiana's been going through lately, I just say I'm the guy who almost beat Mike Pence in 2012.
That's the announcement Thursday that Democrat John Gregg confirming he will run for governor again, a move we discussed with him right here in Indianapolis This Week just 3 weeks ago. We turn back to our insiders, Laura Beck and Abdul Hakim Shabazz. Is he the guy for the Democratic Party?
Well, he's certainly got out of the gate early, and I think that he's made it clear in the video why he wants to run and the reasons behind it. And I think he's got a pretty good shot if you look at some of that recent polling.
He was expecting we were expecting a June 21st date, but obviously he has moved it up.
He moved it up because Glenda Ritz started talking about possibly running for governor. So the Gregg people.
This is the fiction that's working over here.
The fiction that tends to be right. What happened was that John Gregg was going to wait to make a formal announcement. Glenda Ritz said she might run for governor, and her meet available this week. They got scared. They got spooked.
So you think they just ran out and cut a video in an hour?
No, I think they had the video ready to go for a while.
When he ran last time, he ran against the right to work, and this time he seems to be running against RFRA. Will this work this time? Will the electorate buy into that? Because the issue is very divisive. Is this the issue?
I think this is an issue, and I think as we talked about
I think it is an issue, but I'm saying, is this the issue?
I think this is the issue.
Okay.
I do, because I think as we talked about on Friday morning, there is an organic movement out there. I mean, you see those Pence must go signs. I mean, they're all over the place. There's an organic movement out there, and people are genuinely concerned because it sends such a bad message about Indiana. And again, if you watched Pastor Johnson earlier, I'm frankly afraid by those comments, and I'm frankly concerned by those comments. I'm afraid of that.
It is
Hoosier. That makes me very afraid. That's who's supporting Mike Pence.
Think myself as a moderate conservative. When I watched the rally those folks had at the Statehouse asking to bring RFRA back, to me the only thing missing was the original German that a lot of this stuff was in. So I was like, whoa, guys, this is ridiculous. It's not going back. No, but let me finish for a second here.
Sorry.
But now, will this be the issue in 2016? I'm not sure. Will it be an issue? Probably, but you got to remember, John Gregg. It wasn't John Gregg that almost beat Mike Pence. It was Richard Murdoch who almost beat Mike Pence because we had the Richard Murdoch in the backdrop.
Another big development this week, one that could have a dramatic impact on the race for governor. Democrat Glenda Ritz confirming that she is considering a possible run for office next year and blasting the governor in a statement on Thursday.
Despite what he claims, Governor Pence's only education agenda is to prevent me from doing the job that the voters elected me to do. The governor has brought his Washington style of politics to Indiana to accomplish his agenda. Indiana's voters do not support the governor's approach to getting his way.
All that was missing were the balloons and the confetti. Is she running for governor already?
I don't know. I don't know if she is.
Even despite what she just said?
Despite what she said, she has a legitimate reason to be very angry about what they did to her this session. It was shameless. It was shameful.
What did they do to her?
They attacked education.
What did they do to her?
They stripped the only elected statewide Democrat office of her authority because the office is dysfunctional. It's this dysfunction that they created.
What authority did Glenda Ritz lose? Glenda Ritz will still be the chair of the State Board of Education until her term. Until her term.
At the 11th hour, they were totally embarrassed by it and had to change it.
Who does the Pence camp fear most? If he decides to run for re-election, is it a John Gregg, is it a Barron Hill, or is it a Glenda Ritz?
I fear, if I were the Pence people, I would be afraid of a competent Democrat, is what I would be afraid of.
That wasn't the question,
and here's
the three.
No, but if you look at those three, none of them. Because you know what? Every poll that was taken right in the height of the RFRA controversy, John Gregg, Glenda Ritz, and Barron Hill all lose. Matter of fact, John Gregg,
in those same polls, let me finish. In those same polls, just to counter that, Mike Pence is in the 30s in terms of favorable and unfavorable, and less than half of the people would have voted for him if it was a head-to-head today.
And so, so was Mitch Daniels back in 2006, 2007.
No, he didn't.
No, he had very low approval ratings.
I don't think.
And then what happened? You guys went along and picked Joe Long Thompson. Never underestimate the Democrats' ability to pull defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, I think that what you should have said is who Mike Pence should be afraid of is Mike Pence. That's who he should be afraid of.
Will he run for re-election?
I think they're doing everything possible. They're going to run for re-election. They've got 3.5.
So the presidential thing's off the table.
They've got money in the bank. Their RJ is going to come in. They're going to raise at least easily $20 million.
So no presidency.
No presidency, and no primary challenge either.
There will be no Republican that will step forward to say.
No sane Republican. Now, what the Ron Johnson people do, he may get a challenger from the right, which means that person has to be on the ground. But I don't think he'll get a challenge from the business community.
Let's turn to City Hall. In fact, we have a couple of races coming up right in Indianapolis that no one contested. So we have Mr. Brewer, Mr. Hogsett.
Well, they have opponents, but
there's some opponents on the council level.
And of course, in Carmel, we have two Republicans there, Mr. Sharp and Mr. Brainerd. How's that all going to shape up? We're going to have a good voter turnout, or is this going to be a boring?
I sat down. I spoke to both those gentlemen on my weekday radio program. They both seem confident about a possible victory. Obviously, trying to unseat an incumbent is a little bit of a tricky nature, but Jim, this is his 6th term in office, so there may be some of that fatigue. And what's helped the incumbent in the past is the opposition has always sort of been divided. So I think it'll be close, but I think he'll probably pull out a victory.
I'll give you 10 seconds. Anything you want to say about primary Tuesday?
I just think we'll see Marion County Democratic Party Chair Joel Miller pull out another great get out the vote effort.
Wherever you vote, vote, right? Wherever you live, just vote. We want you to vote.
Stay home if you have no idea what you're doing.
There's more conversation on Twitter with all our insiders. Join the debate with Lara, Abdul, Mary Beth, Dan, and Jennifer anytime. Indianapolis This Week continues after the break. And remember, Saturday is the Angie's List Grand Prix of Indianapolis from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. RTV6 is the place for race coverage. Our Grand Prix view starts at 1 o'clock, followed by live coverage of the race from start to finish on RTV6, the only place to see the race. And stick around at 6 p.m. for the best post-race coverage and analysis anywhere in the city. Thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. I'm Rafael Sanchez. We'll be back here next Sunday. I hope you have a great day.